From the Dutch era throughout the 1850s, the Hudson Valley was a region marked by constant, though often suppressed, tenant revolts. These weren't just acts of rebellion against British taxation, but a broader fight against an oppressive feudal system known as the Patroon system. Born from Dutch greed, this system allowed wealthy landowners, or patroons, to control nearly every aspect of a tenant's life. Despite the Sons of Liberty's claims to champion the people's cause, they failed to channel this widespread discontent into a larger revolution. Many of them prospered under and helped reinforce the very feudal system that kept most colonists oppressed. The legacy of the Patroon system still echoes today, as corporations, their lobbyists, and stockholding senators continue to shape housing markets and their property rights. When Henry Hudson first sailed up the Hudson River in September of 1609, he discovered its immense beauty, and he immediately claimed it for the Dutch. Hudson also noted the river valley was vastly populated with beavers, one of the most sought-after goods on the European market. The Dutch crown initially attempted setting up small beaver trades and settlements, which made almost no progress. So in 1622, they created the Dutch West Indies Company in an effort to operate more smoothly. The Dutch crown used the West India Company to bring home its commerce and ensure returns on investments. The main goal of this company was to profit in the transatlantic trade, not develop permanent settlements. Proof of this thought process can be found in the charter which established the West India Company. It never granted the Dutch any official land rights because they originally believed that they would eventually leave and return the land to the Delaware, Esopus, Lenape, and other native tribes to the Hudson Valley. In 1628, the Dutch West India Company, or WIC, established a Freedoms and Exemptions Charter, which legitimized patroons. A subsequent Freedoms Charter of 1629 established that stockholders in the WIC who were given land had to plant settlements of 50 or more people over the age of 15 after a 4-year, quote, development period. The West India Company relied on the patroons to make profit and progress. Each patroon had a set tax rate to give to the crown. The Dutch crown knew how much they could make off the fur trade, but they had no desire to manage it or set it up in person, especially because of its distance. The Dutch crown used the West India Company to bring home its commerce and returns on investments. The West India Company relied on the patroons to make profit and progress in trade and land development. Each patroon had a set tax rate to give to the crown. Making money for anyone involved in the patroon system only meant making tenants work twice as hard or for higher lease rates. These leases were more often than not clear violations of basic rights. But the shared capital gains through tenant labor encouraged tenant leases to be exploited and led for no political recourse. Patroons are almost expected to screw tenants over to meet certain quotas because of this dichotomy. Rich families who were stockholders in the Dutch West India Company, like the Van Rensselaers, Livingstons, Phillipses, Van Cortlands, and more, got their grants from the Dutch West India Company by the 1640s. They immediately began expanding, trying to monopolize on the fur trade. The largest of the patroon families, of whom I just mentioned, at the very least had 100,000 acres each. The Van Rensselaers at one point owned 1 million acres. By 1668, 4 years after the English takeover of New Netherlands, official land grants had been given to the patroons, now called manor lords by the English crown. These grants just essentially now reinforced their claim to the land under British rule. With these land grants, the crown also imposed taxes, like with Killian Van Rensselaer's agreement, which forced him to give the Director of New York 10% of the rents and income he collected from his tenants, as well as 6% from the proceeds of the patroon farm and land sales. This was similar to the deals made with other patroons. No recorded documents ever mentioned a change in the political or feudal power patroons could possess. So what were tenant agreements like? The Livingstons, for example, required tenants like Solomon Schutt in 1748 to sign a lease, which made him responsible for paying part of the schoolmaster's and minister's salary. The Van Rensselaers offered leases that quote-unquote lasted forever. But tenants never had a real right to the land, and the Rensselaers determined what was a violation or not. Basically, they would evict people who spent their entire adult life and savings on a property, and after years of development, their land is just taken away with no warning or truthful reason. Although Willem Prendergast was an aristocrat by birth, he was one of the early leaders in the fight against the Patroon monopolies. When he moved to New York in 1756 and saw the oppressive system firsthand, he was outraged by the control the landowners had over tenants. Prendergast took inspiration from Nathaniel Bacon's rebellion in Virginia, which was a similar revolt against landholding elites. One thing that barely changed throughout all of the tenant revolts was what they wanted. The tenants wanted simple things. They wanted greater autonomy, fair lease terms, and an end to the perpetual nature of their leases. They also demanded for reduced rents and the right to pass property down to their descendants. They wanted to be able to pay a quit rent, which allowed them to make a one-time purchase of their land outright. Despite their anger, mobilization, and violence, these early tenant revolts failed, largely because of the overwhelming political influence held by the landowning families. The Patroons in the region, especially the Van Rensselaers and Livingstons, not only controlled vast amounts of land, but were also deeply embedded in New York's political structure. They used their power in politics to suppress local tenant uprisings, often with the backing of local law enforcement, which was usually staffed by their own political allies and even relatives. Like in Albany County, where the Van Rensselaer family consistently won elections highly in their favor. They secured more than 85% of tenant votes in the 1970s elections. By the 1810s, the Van Rensselaers had expanded their control over local politics, making it nearly impossible for the tenants to organize effectively. The political dominance of landholding families ensured that no meaningful changes came from the revolts, as they held sway over both land and law. Now, after the American Revolution, you'd be shocked to learn that there were still patroon systems lurking in the Hudson Valley. The anti-rent war, which broke out in the 1830s, marked a significant shift in the political landscape. With the rise of the two-party system, landlord-tenant disputes were increasingly politicized. The anti-renters eventually learned from the Democrats that it was more important to gain the political trust and respect of other citizens than send a message through very brutal and bloody riots. By the time the anti-rent war reached its peak in the 1830s and 40s, the movement had gained the support of between 25,000 and 60,000 people, a significant portion of the population. By 1840, voter participation in regions controlled by patroon families had skyrocketed, as tenants realized they could fight back through the ballot box rather than through violent revolt. In Albany County, voter turnout jumped from 36% in 1822 to over 90% in 1828. Between 1800 and 1840, the percentage of landlords holding political office dropped drastically from 45% to just 5%, signaling the growing political engagement of tenant farmers. With the introduction of the party system after the American Revolution, renters had a new way of making their name heard. They were able to secure better leases, and eventually all the patroon manors were wiped out, and so were perpetual lifelong leases. Today, modern corporations take the place of Dutch patroons. They control many aspects of our lives, and if you see an injustice that needs solving, you can go out, get a group of your friends together, and start a political movement. Thanks for watching.